You know I'm Shirley Lindburg. And I want you to notice this tile. If you may have seen these tiles in the nursery, and this is one of them. So when we built the sanctuary, a lot of mothers made tiles for their kids, and you'll see them both in both sides of the nursery. And this is one of our three. So actually, I think I'll pull this down a little bit. So I was been asked, do you get nervous when you talk? And I work with the school district with English language learners and gifted kids. And I don't get nervous now, except when it's something personal. So I am nervous today. So I wanted to tell you about that tile, but I want to talk to you about a miracle. In Psalm 77, you'll find this verse. I will remember the deeds of the Lord. Yes, I will remember your miracles of long ago. Although long ago seems like it should be really, really long ago, in this case, this miracle is 18 years ago. And tonight I'd like to remember the miracle that we experienced as a family and through our very loving and prayerful, with the very loving and prayerful support of our church family and a lot of friends as well. I used to think that people would really get tired of listening to the story that I'm about to tell you, but God asks us to share our miracles, and so that we never forget what He can do. That brings me to the question at your table today. So I'd like you to grab your questions. I'm going to do a little teacher thing with you and set you up before I start talking. The first question is, think of a miracle, which is something only God can do, that you've experienced in your life. It doesn't have to seem grand. There is no miracle that isn't good enough to share. By sharing, we are glorifying God. So prepare yourself to glorify God through sharing your story tonight. So I'm going to pray that God moves you to want to share a story tonight. So let me start way back with this memory. This is my little Mary Lee, right there. And our family and how we looked in 1999. It was Mary Lee's second birthday, and I was pregnant with our third child. I was a stay-at-home mom, and my husband's, John, sold life insurance and worked straight commission. But some months were much tighter than others. At this time, however, things were going really well. You might recognize some of these people. So for those of you who don't know, John, my husband John, is brother to Mary Lee and Pastor Jeff. And there's little Mary Lee and Victoria and Geraldine, Cal and Ellis. So this is 18 years ago. Another thing I'd like you to remember as I'm telling you about this, remember when Liz talked a month ago, February 1st? That was the day Stephen was born. And I want you to think of how long that is between then and now, because it plays into this story as well. So we were really excited about having this baby come, and the end of February is what we anticipated. Now we're going to skip ahead to around Christmas time. And on one Saturday morning, we were all up, got into the kitchen, and there was a bag hanging on the door, on the handle of the door outside on our deck. I said to John, that's strange. So I opened up the door and pulled out this beautifully wrapped box. Came from Eddie Bauer, and this green paper and gold bow, and I opened it up, and all that I saw on it was this crinkle wrap, or crinkle paper, all cut up. I thought, this is kind of strange. But in the very bottom, there was a check for $1,000. And in the memo line, in squiggly handwriting, it said, for your baby's hospital bills, Merry Christmas. I thought, this is so strange. I actually called Mary Lee to tell her about it, and she said, I was hoping you'd get that. Yeah, I hung it on your door. Really? We didn't know who it was, but I couldn't figure out why would anybody feel the need to give us $1,000. Imagine what that was like. You're giving us $1,000. We're not in dire straits. My baby's healthy. My husband's doing fine, but you're giving us $1,000 and you don't want us to know who it is. Kind of strange. But I thought, we're going to just put it in the bank and trust that this person wanted us to have it, and planned on using it for our hospital bills that should come in a couple of months. And then at the end by the end of January, we knew we'd be, go back. And as time went on, it was the end of January, we still had a month to go, and this is how I looked. So 90s.
Big hair.
At around the same time, my friend Jolynn Brooks, and some of you who've been here for a long time know Scott and Jolynn. Scott used to be our music pastor. She was also expecting her first baby, and her child was due any day. So one day she was over and we were visiting, and out of the blue she said to me, I can't believe it, my brother's good friend, his wife was 9 months pregnant and they lost their baby to a cord accident. And I thought, oh, you've got to be kidding. Why are you telling, that's what I'm thinking, why are you telling me this? You're not making me feel very good. And then I realized she's probably telling me this so she feels better about it's not going to happen if I say it out loud. So we pulled out another 90s thing, what to expect when you're expecting. And we looked through the book to try to figure out why would this kind of thing happen. And put the book down, and a few days later, Jolynn had a baby girl, completely healthy. And then about a week later, in the middle of the night, I was woken up by David, our 4-year-old. Normally, I would feel our baby move a lot. He was very active, especially 9:30 at night. But I didn't, and I was kind of gnawing at me. You know, it's in the middle of the night. You know how you get really more worried about stuff in the middle of the night? So I thought, I bet you I'm just getting paranoid. But it kept gnawing at me. I finally got David settled, and I was thinking, I'm trying to get this baby to move. So I was jiggling my belly and going and eating something, and finally I went downstairs and pulled out that book again. And I thought, I'm sure I'm just paranoid. It's just middle of the night, everything's fine, you know what it's like, you get all worried about stuff and there's nothing wrong. So I went back to bed. And when I got up in the next morning, I told John I was really worried about this, and he's a guy, what did he say? I'm sure it's fine, no problem. But I said, I don't feel convinced that everything's okay. So I got David and little Marilee ready to go to Bible study at church, and decided to leave the kids with Marilee Valentine so I could get to the hospital and see the doctor. So I get the kids in, I'm trying to act really cool, you know, like, yeah, everything's fine, and everybody's going to Bible study and dropping off their kids, and I pull Marilee aside and said, I think something's wrong with my baby. It's not moving, and she's like, grabs my belly, and she's, I can feel it moving. Like, no, it's me crying. And it was just me crying. So she said, don't worry about it. I'll take the kids. You go to the hospital and go see the doctor. I had an appointment anyway. I just wanted to go early. Made up for all the times I was late. I got there an hour early. And for those of you who remember Dr. McCoy, he was my doctor then. And they brought me into the back room to check the heart rate of our little baby, and what a relief to hear that heartbeat. It was 162 or something like that. We're having a girl. In those days, you usually didn't find out. Some people did, but I certainly didn't find out. So I thought, I'm having a girl. I'm sure I'm having a girl. And I said something to the doctor, or I said something to the nurse, to Patsy, and said, oh, I'm so relieved. It's so great to hear that. I know the baby's okay. And she kind of gave me this kind of concerned look, and she said, well, we'll see what Dr. McCoy says. And so they sent me down to labor and delivery to be monitored. But before I left, Patsy wrapped her arms around me and prayed with me. She knew I was a believer. If you know Dr. McCoy, I'm sure you know Patsy. As I set up the monitors, little did I know that Debbie Lee, I didn't even know who Debbie Lee was, and some of you might not know her, but Debbie Lee goes to our church. They take people to Kenya, every summer. She was our nurse, my nurse. And I didn't know that till Marilee walked in and they're, hi Debbie, hi Marilee. And I'm like, you guys know each other? But she was my nurse and she was specifically called in to watch over me. Little did I know that within that day, our lives were going to be turned upside down. Once the monitor was on, our heartbeat, the baby's heartbeat rate was going higher and higher, and Dr. McCoy came in and asked me if I wanted to have a consultation with somebody else, another high-risk pregnancy specialist. And I'm like, no, I trust you. Everything's going to be fine with you. And he said, well, we're going to induce you. We just want to try that first, but the baby might be stressed, so we'll see how that goes. And John was on his way, and Marilee she was on her way, and the baby's heart rate climbed up to 180. And I was on the phone talking to a friend, saying, yeah, we're going to have a baby today. And the nurse said, put the phone down right now. And I looked at her, and the heart rate was 50. So I hung up the phone, and all of a sudden the room was filled with people. And John and Marilee got there, and they were getting me ready to wheel me into the operating room. And Marilee came with me. John wasn't quite ready to see all that blood and stuff, and they anticipated, doing an epidural and me being awake for the delivery, and the epidural went to here. Twice they did it, and that's as far as it went. And I remember Marilee standing there, and she was holding my hand. And by the way, actually, I was thinking, as I was laying there, pretty much butt naked, I did have socks on. It's a thing. I'm trying to hold it up. My belly's out here, and they're the ones wearing masks. Have you ever wondered why they get to wear masks and you don't? I said to them, I hope none of you go to my church. Oh my glory. And anyway, they tried, and all of a sudden they said to Marilee, you need to leave. And I saw her walk away. And at that moment, it didn't hurt, but I could feel the pressure of the blade on my belly.
Ooh.
And then I was gone. A little while later, I remember being in recovery, and you just can't open your eyes. And I heard a voice. It was somebody from our church that was an anesthesiologist. He was there that day, and he said, you had a boy. I'm like, what? You had a boy. I'm like, I thought I was going to have a girl. I really did. He said, yeah, you had a boy. And I was so excited. Stephen Leonard Calvin, named after both grandpas, was born a month early and weighed a solid 6 pounds, 8 ounces. Eventually, I was wheeled back to my room, and I remember seeing Jeff and John down the hall, and I'm kind of, again, that you can hardly see, and I'm like kind of way back. Marilee, I think you were still with the baby, and Stephen. And I remember them moving me onto the bed, and I still couldn't really open my eyes. And I remember hearing a nurse say, she was one lucky girl to get him in here when she did. And the other nurse said, she's not lucky. She had an angel on her shoulder. We thought, wow, the worst of it is over. Our baby was born. I was out of surgery. My parents were coming from Canada. Unfortunately, we were so wrong. I wasn't doing well enough to go to the NICU to see Stephen that night. He was born like 3:30 in the afternoon. And he wasn't well enough to come see me. So the first sight of my newborn baby was in the viewfinder of a camera. In the 2000, right? So it's like, not even a phone. It was just like, oh, he's so cute. He's so little. But I thought, well, maybe tomorrow. Maybe tomorrow I'll get to see them. But I was in pretty rough shape. Because of the urgency of the C-section, and I later have quite a few months later, had a conversation with Debbie Lee about how it actually went. She said it was so fast. She said, we've been through faster C-sections, but this one was pretty fast. I just really wasn't doing well. I couldn't sit up, but they got me into a wheelchair, and they brought me to see Stephen. And you can tell he's not looking so great. I'm not looking so great either, but love the hair though. Fortunately, I still had a lot of drugs on board, because when I got there to see him, they wrapped him up and they put him in my arms, and his eye was swollen, really bad, swollen, quite big, and they swallowed him, put him into my arms, and instead of crying, he did this. And I think God protected me, because I was like, it's okay, you're fine. Not thinking that was really not good. So I do think that the drugs were a good thing, because that was really, really hard to go through. So went back to my room, and Jeff and Mary came back and prayed with him. But then that night, the doctor walked in and said, your son needs to have surgery, and he needs to have it tonight. And you can go to Spokane, Seattle, or Salt Lake City. Where would you like to go? Fortunately, John was gone with the kids. My dad said, which is closer? He knew which was closer, but even in that case, he didn't. It was like, which is closer? He said, and which one's the best? He said, any of them, but you have to decide now. So my dad said, we'll go to Spokane. So because of the lack of oxygen before birth, Stephen had a ruptured intestine, and he was very, very sick. I actually remember now, thinking back, that it was 24 hours since he had moved last. And I remember it very clearly, because that morning, the day before, I was going to we're all in here, I was going to the bathroom, and all of a sudden I felt this, what it felt like to me, I don't know what really happened, but what it felt like to me was that he went like this. And I was down and to the sides, and like, oh, did that ever hurt? And I realized later, that was the last time he moved. So it was probably 24 hours where his oxygen was being cut off. I think what happened, again, there's no medical evidence, this is me, that when he did that, he tightened the cord around his neck. So, where was I? So that night, what they told us was that Stephen would have to, it was about 9 o'clock that he told us, he said, we're going to fly Stephen to Spokane, and he's going to need a blood transfusion first. And so my parents were there, and John came back, and Jeff and Mary Lee were there. Jolene's husband Scott came, and we were with Stephen, and I remember him laying in the bed, and I held his hand, and this was after the blood transfusion, so he was doing better because of that. And I hung onto his hand, and I said, it's going to be okay. And he turned and looked at me, which was great, because I really didn't know if he was going to make it through the night. So we found out then it was too foggy for him to take an ambulance, or to take a plane. So they put him on an ambulance. I couldn't believe this was happening to us. Here my son, our newborn son, was going to be whisked away, miles away without me. We couldn't even go with him. So like, we're putting him, because we didn't have a pediatric surgeon here. They were just going to put him in an ambulance, take him, and I couldn't go. I had to stay. He was going with the nurses. Although when as we're waiting for the ambulance attendants to come, they walked in, and I swear those two were 16 years old. They looked so young, and I really, seriously, I looked at them and thought, how can you be old enough to drive my baby all the way to Spokane at night? But they had two nurses that went with them, and in that ride, which the roads were horrible, and that pass to Spokane, and they think he had one, maybe two seizures along the way. And my parents stayed with John and I through the night as we waited for the phone calls. First one, he made it to Spokane. Then a little bit later, he's going into surgery. And he's out of surgery. He's doing okay. It was the longest night of my life, and a piece of my heart was 200 miles away. Stephen had necrotizing enterocolitis, which means his intestine ruptured and part of it died because of the lack of oxygen at birth. And the way it works is that when you have your oxygen cut off, it concentrates on your brain and your heart. So it's like the blood comes this way, so the organ that's furthest away starts getting damaged first. And for him, it was his intestines. It turns out he had a very, very long, scrawny umbilical cord that was wrapped around his neck twice, around his body, and around his arm. He had 4 inches of intestine removed, and he had a double-barrel stoma, which means his intestine stuck out, a couple different, like, they cut some out, they stuck the rest out. He had a colostomy bag. And he got to Spokane without a name even, since it all happened so fast. When we got there, his chart said, Baby Boy Lindburg. What we did know, though, is that we had a church family that prayed and prayed continually. And many of you are here tonight. You prayed and you prayed. I get shivers just saying that. From the time I went into the hospital and Marilee put it on the prayer chain, and every day for weeks people prayed. Stephen was born on Tuesday. He left for Spokane on Wednesday night at 11:30 at night. And on Friday I was finally able to leave the hospital, but I did so without my baby. The next day, my parents were gonna take John and I on that 3-hour trip to go see our son. My dad had said, if it's too hard on you, because I was not in good shape, even if we're halfway there, we'll turn around and come back. And I thought, no, I couldn't do that. But I didn't want to say that to him. It's like, okay, sure. Our house was, little average first-time house. I couldn't walk from the hall, from our bedroom to the kitchen without it hurting. I thought, how in the world am I going to get to Spokane today and back? So then I said, yeah, I'm ready to go. We got in the car and we went down 23rd. I just thought, I'm not going to make it even out of this town. But thank you to Lortab. And seat warmers. That by the time I got to Frenchtown, I was feeling pretty good. Although it didn't last, because we literally went there and went back. As I walked into the NICU at Deaconess Medical Center in Spokane, I panicked. I thought, I don't remember what Stephen looks like. How am I going to recognize him? I saw him for such a short amount of time, and we didn't have our phones where we could take pictures. Merely had to go and get them developed. But when I walked in and they showed me where I was, I tell you what, it was so great to see him. But as you can see, he's not in good shape. He's on a ventilator. He's got a PICC line in his head. He's got a tube down into his belly, through his belly button. He's got all kinds of wires attached to him, and that tight legs, loose arms can be an indication of what I was told. So those of you who are nurses might be wrong, but what I was told is that this can be an indication of brain damage. He was a no STEMI baby, which means he couldn't have any stimulus at all. Remember, you know what you do to babies? You can't, oh, hi there. And John did that, and the nurse said, stop. You can't stimulate him at all. You have to put your hand on his head and hold his foot, and that's all you can do. Don't move. That was hard. He had a job to do, and that was to get better, and our job was to let him get better. The doctors explained that there was damage to every organ in his body except for his heart and his lungs, and we wouldn't know about his brain until time passed. The doctor said that there was nothing we could do but let him heal. Stephen would need another surgery in a month to reattach his bowel, and then he would need more time to recover again and gain weight before he could take him home. And I wasn't in good shape myself. I mean, it was pretty bad. The speed at which they had to take Stephen out caused a lot of stress on my body, and the doctor wanted me to heal as well. So he told me that it was best for me to stay home. So Stephen's in Spokane, and they're saying, you should stay at home. There was nothing we could do for Stephen since we could not interact with him, and we could only see him 3 times a day for 50 minutes if we were actually there. So I have a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old at home who are missing me, and a baby who has no idea who I am, and I can't touch him much at all. And I knew that he was in good hands, so I decided, yeah, you're right, I need to go home and heal. But it broke my heart. I have to tell you that not staying in Spokane for what was one of the most difficult decisions I've ever made in my life. When I was in Spokane, I felt guilty about not being with my 2 other kids, and when I was with them, I felt guilty about not being with Stephen. It actually took me 10 years to get over that guilt and realize that I can have peace with that decision. I remember people telling me, I could have never done what you did. And I'm sure they meant it as a compliment to encourage me about how strong I was. The truth is, we forget that God gives us the strength and courage to get through what we need to when we need it. Do I right now have the courage and strength to get through chemotherapy treatments? I don't. Not right now. Could I survive the loss of one of my children at this moment? Absolutely not. I couldn't even imagine how it would be to be able to breathe in that time. But I trust God. And I know He would give me the strength to go through it, give me what I need, and He would carry me along the way. I know that because He carried me through that very difficult time with Stephen. Remember that. God will give you what you need when you need it. Not before, but when you need it. You can get through anything when you have God. But it wasn't easy either. I would get regular calls from the hospital, keeping me up to date on how Stephen was doing. One night, however, during his first week in Spokane, I got a call that he had spent a lot of time crying. I have to say, I don't know why this nurse would tell me that when there's nothing I could do about it. He's crying a lot, we can't get him to settle down. It's so awful to hear those words when you're so far away. But it was then that I realized that I relied on something I heard from Mary Lee, who had been sharing prayer requests with extended family. Her cousin Lynn, who lived in Colorado, had her church praying, and they took some time to pray in their ladies' Bible study. As Lynn was praying, she had a vision. The vision was a little baby, and coming from the sky to the little baby was this silver sparkly string. And in the vision, as she got closer, she saw that that string was actually angels. And when they get to the baby, they would pour healing oils upon the baby. I hung on to that vision like you wouldn't believe that night. So many people were praying. I knew God had a plan, and I was going to trust that plan. I would continue to believe that Stephen would be healed completely until God showed me otherwise. The next day, I got a call from the pediatric nephrologist, kidney specialist. Aren't you impressed with my knowledge? She told me that I had one lucky little boy. There was blood coming from his bladder, and they couldn't figure out why, and at one point they discussed a kidney transplant. The good news, the blood was no longer there, and they were no longer worried about his kidneys. I was with Stephen, and I left for a few minutes to go get something to eat. No big deal. When I returned, within probably 20 minutes, there were 3 doctors, 4 nurses gathered around Stephen, and someone getting blood out of his heel, and his color was gray. and they believed that he was fighting an infection that developed so quickly before they could even find out for sure he was on antibiotics. Things like that happened throughout Stephen's time in Spokane, but the countless prayers of God's people lifted him up, and ultimately he improved. Then it was time for the second surgery. This is how Stephen looked when I left him. Before the second surgery, I went back home, and then I was coming back for a second surgery. His eyes would roll around in his head, and he just was totally limp. I was excited because I thought he looked good compared to what he used to look. But to look back on those pictures, this wasn't just him sleeping. This is pretty much how he looked. It'd been a week since I had left Stephen and then came back for his second surgery. When I left him, his eyes would not focus, his limbs were weak. When I tried to feed him with the bottle, I would have to pump his chin, stick the bottle in his mouth, and I'd pump up and down so that he'd get some, but he never really ate that much. A week later, he's got this full face, totally different baby. I swear that in that week, God touched his body and his brain and healed him. He looked like a completely different new little man. Stephen's second surgery was scheduled in a couple of days, and John was planning on being there. But that evening, the doctors told me Stephen was bumped up, and another baby who was doing not very well at all couldn't have his surgery, so they put Stephen in his place. Everything happened so fast. The next morning, as they were wheeling him away, and actually I want to back up a bit. Today is March 1st. On March 1st is the day I left to go see him and have his surgery. So think about, Liz spoke February 1st, that's the day he was born. He was in the hospital on March 1st. 18 years ago today, he was going to have his second surgery. I left home thinking, sorry, John, Marilee, Stephen, or David, I'm not coming back until I come home with our baby. It was so hard to see him wheeled down the hallway. And then I realized there is no other place I'd rather be. The only surgery they won't do at Deaconess in Spokane is heart-lung transplants in babies. So we were at high level. He was going down the hall, the surgery was planned. He wasn't going down the highway. I didn't think I could get through it, but then I realized, yeah, I can. And the prayers continued. My parents came for the surgery, and John was able to come the next day. Stephen did great, and he was on the road to recovery again. He just needed to heal and gain weight. With each prayer, with each day, Stephen got better and better. I would ask when I could take him home, and I could never get a straight answer. I swear that NICU nurses take a class called Being Evasive 101. I trusted them, they knew what they wanted that they wanted the best for him, but they could never give me an idea. Do you think he'll go home now? We don't know. And we literally talked about that at the hospital. They never ever say. And we'd ask again. 1 week passed, Stephen gained weight, Stephen lost weight. Another week passed, Stephen gained weight, Stephen lost weight. And then I was trying to convince them, well, I have to arrange for someone to come pick me up, so it's really good if you tell me when he can go home. Trying to make a deal. The doctor came in and he hemmed and he hawed, and he's like, well, he hasn't really gained the weight he should. We'll see how it looks tomorrow. And then he'd come back and I said, well, if we send you back, you're going to see Dr. Harper as soon as you get there, and then every week until he gains weight. He has to gain weight every time, or you're going back in the hospital. Oh yeah, I promise, I'll do that. And then all of a sudden he said the words that I long to hear, that any mother who has a baby in the hospital wants to hear. You're going home. I got shivers again. to hear those words were just magical. I turned to another mother in the room, and she said, well, what did he say? And I said, we're going home. And I barely got it out, and I just bawled my eyes out. The words you want to hear. It had been 6 weeks, but it felt like forever. And on March 15th, we brought our baby home. And it was like life began again. This is him after his surgery. This is actually the first picture of the three of us. A month after he was born. Look at how chubby he is there. That's just liquid. Retained water. This is the day we got to go home. And this, David, Marilee, and Stephen. They waited a long time. They never saw him while he was in the hospital at all. So this was the first time we got to see him. And actually, later, David had said, he was 4, he said, can you go to Spokane and get another baby? And for a while they thought that Stephen was actually born in Spokane because they never saw him. I could go on and on and on about the miracles and the blessings that were part of our experience. Like when I called the ambulance company, the first place that I called after 23 different providers sent us a bill. And for Stephen's care, and I called the ambulance company, and I wanted to set up a payment plan and wanted to see if they could do it without interest. And they said, so why did you go to Spokane? And I said, my newborn had to have emergency surgery. And the lady said, just a minute. And she went away and she came back. She said, don't worry about it. And I started to cry and said, why? Why don't I have to pay the bill? She said, because you had a baby that was very sick, and we don't want you to have to pay for that. And actually, it cost about, this is 18 years ago, imagine what it would cost now. We got a bill from Deaconess for $99,000 with an envelope to send our payment back. So many different places wrote off the bills. The hardest one was Community Medical Center. We paid interest for that one.
I'll believe that.
Do you remember that $1,000 that was hanging on the door? It ended up that Stephen cost us just what a typical healthy baby delivery would cost. Or I could tell you about the friend I made in Spokane. This is Zach. Stephen and Zach were roommates. And Zach was born at 24 weeks, and he weighed 1 pound, 2 ounces, and was 12 inches long. His mom and Kelly and I shared so many experiences together that our hearts were drawn together, and ultimately our friendship became one for eternity. She became a believer through her experience as well. Zach survived against all odds. He graduates this June as well, and he's completely healthy. And we still stay in touch. I'm going to show you this. Oh, who is that guy? There's a different picture I wanted to show you, but I think I must have put it. There's this picture of Stephen. Actually, I posted it on Facebook today where his eyes huge and his smile is big. Stephen was really slow to develop to reach all of his milestones. He smiled later than most babies. He took his time crawling and walking. And he was the happiest baby you could ever meet. At 2 years old, he would put himself to bed for a nap. Unbelievable. Carol and Sarah and I and Nell and Kathy, we plan VBS in those days at our house. And Stephen would just go, and despite the noise, he would sleep and he'd just go put himself to bed. I tired, Mommy. He was something else. Stephen ended up with no brain damage. He did have to have a couple more surgeries when he was 5.5 because of scar tissue and adhesions in his belly. But unless you see a scar, you'd never know that anything happened. Imagine, he was 6 pounds, 8 ounces. His scar was probably that big. Well, now he's 6'4", and his scar is like this big. I believe with all my heart, based on what I saw, that God healed his brain and his body and heard the prayers of the people, of his people. The weakness of his arms and his legs, the shivering of his body despite the fact that he was warm, the rolling around of his eyes, God touched him and healed him. And God wants me to tell this story. Stephen's story is still being written. And whether he lives a long life or somehow, some way his life is cut short, God has etched him into the palm of his hand and breathed life and purpose into him. This is Stephen now. This was taken by B. This is his senior picture. This June, Stephen will graduate from Sentinel, and in the fall he will attend Montana State University in Bozeman. He wants to get his degree in business and marketing. And I wanted to close with this verse. I chose for Stephen's baby dedication. Jeremiah 29:11. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans to prosper you and not to harm you. Plans to give you hope and a future. I felt called to tell this story to you all tonight, and there is a reason for that. And I'm not sure what that reason is for you. But I do know that by telling it, God is glorified. Let's praise and glorify him this evening by sharing your story too. Push the thoughts away that says, nobody wants to listen to my story. Or I'm too shy, I can't share. This isn't about you. This is about God. Listen to him. Hear his prompting. Follow him and trust him. So let's pray. Heavenly Father, I am honored and glorifying you to share this story tonight. I'm so honored that I could come and speak this story that I love so much that I could tell over and over again, because it's a story of your healing on Stephen's life. There is purpose in his life. There's purpose in this story. You had so many miracles and amazing things happen in this 6 weeks of his life where he was so sick. And I know there are stories in this room that would fill this place in glory and honor to you. And some of these women here might think, I'm just not ready to tell that story. But maybe, Lord, you will push them along so that they tell someone on another day or another time. But I know that these things happen in our lives so that you will be glorified and honored. Give us the courage to tell our story. Give us the courage to tell your story. Thank you that we can all be together. Thank you that Stephen is so healthy and strong. Thank you for the miracles that you have brought into the lives of these women here and that you're continuing to do so. Thank you for our time together. In Jesus' name, amen. I wanted to